Sometimes the smallest voice in a crowded room is the one that changes every life forever. Ethan Calloway stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Boston Children's Hope Foundation ballroom, finishing a speech that financial magazines would almost certainly quote the following morning. Hundreds of guests filled the elegant hall, including hospital directors, philanthropists, business leaders, and families whose lives had been transformed by pediatric research. Behind him, a massive screen displayed photographs of children receiving life-changing therapy funded by donations from organizations across the country. Ethan thanked the audience for believing that innovation should always begin with compassion before stepping away from the podium as warm applause echoed through the room. To everyone watching, he looked exactly as expected: calm, successful, unshakable. The billionaire founder of Calloway Robotics had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, and every public appearance reinforced the same carefully protected image. Discipline first, emotion second. The past, if possible, forgotten altogether. 6 years earlier, he had made a decision he believed was necessary. He had erased Jasmine Carter from his life, with the same determination that had helped him build his company. Her number disappeared from his phone. Her photographs were packed into a storage box he never opened again. Every memory became another chapter he refused to revisit. He convinced himself that moving forward required leaving certain people behind, no matter how much they had once meant to him. As guests gathered for dinner, Ethan moved through the ballroom, greeting donors and hospital administrators with practiced confidence. A local television reporter requested a brief interview. A university president congratulated him on a recent research initiative. Everything followed the predictable rhythm of another successful charity event until a small voice interrupted the carefully choreographed evening. "Daddy!" The word floated above the conversations with innocent certainty. Ethan turned instinctively. A little girl no older than 5 ran across the ballroom, wearing a pale blue dress and white sneakers that flashed tiny lights with every step. Before anyone could react, she wrapped both arms around his leg and looked up at him with a smile so bright that several nearby guests stopped talking altogether. Ethan froze. The room around him seemed to disappear. He had never seen the child before in his life. He slowly knelt until they were at eye level. "Sweetheart," he said gently, careful not to frighten her, "I think you may have mistaken me for someone else." The little girl studied his face with complete confidence before shaking her head. "No," she answered cheerfully. "Mommy showed me your picture." Ethan felt every conversation around them grow quieter. Curious eyes turned toward the unexpected scene. Before he could ask another question, a familiar voice spoke from behind the gathering crowd. "Ava!" Jasmine Carter stepped forward, her expression calm despite the surprise unfolding before her. Time had changed many things, but not the quiet dignity Ethan remembered. She wore a simple emerald dress, with a volunteer identification badge clipped neatly beside her shoulder, and the moment her eyes met his, neither accusation nor anger appeared in them, only surprise. She gently rested a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Honey," she said softly, "come with me." Ava looked from Jasmine back to Ethan. "But Mommy," she whispered, "that is him." Jasmine offered Ethan a brief, respectful nod before leading her daughter toward another part of the ballroom without another word. Ethan remained kneeling for several seconds after they disappeared into the crowd, unable to understand why his heart suddenly refused to slow down. Then his attention caught something that made him stand completely still. Around Ava's small wrist rested a thin braided leather bracelet with a tiny silver compass attached to it. Ethan knew that bracelet. 6 years earlier, he had made it by hand for one person, believing no other piece exactly like it would ever exist. The image of the braided leather bracelet followed Ethan Calloway home that night with a persistence no business problem had ever managed to achieve. Long after the charity gala ended and the last congratulatory messages arrived on his phone, he remained standing inside the quiet penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, turning a nearly identical bracelet over in his hand. It rested inside a small wooden box tucked away in the back of his study bookshelf, untouched for 6 years. He had made 2 of them one rainy weekend when Jasmine Carter had joked that expensive jewelry could never compete with something built by hand. She had laughed when he accidentally stitched one side unevenly, insisting the tiny flaw made it perfect because it proved a real person had created it. Ethan remembered placing one bracelet around her wrist while keeping the second as a promise that they would always know where home was, no matter how busy life became. Until that evening, he had never imagined seeing either bracelet again. Sleep never came. Instead, memories returned one quiet piece at a time. 6 years earlier, Jasmine had still been the person who knew how to interrupt his endless workdays without making him feel guilty. She would bring coffee into his office with a smile, leave handwritten notes inside his briefcase before business trips, and patiently remind him that success meant very little if no one was waiting to celebrate it with him afterward. During those years, Calloway Robotics was expanding faster than anyone had predicted. Investors demanded constant travel. International partnerships filled every calendar. Ethan convinced himself that sacrificing personal time was only temporary. Jasmine rarely complained, but she noticed the growing distance between them long before he did. One October evening, she invited him to dinner at their favorite neighborhood restaurant overlooking the Charles River. They had celebrated birthdays there, career milestones, and countless ordinary Fridays that somehow became unforgettable simply because they shared them together. Ethan arrived nearly 40 minutes late after an emergency conference call with investors in California. Jasmine greeted him with the same gentle smile she always wore, yet something about her quietness felt unfamiliar. Halfway through dinner, she reached across the table and softly asked, "Do you ever wonder whether we are planning so much for the future that we have stopped living in the present?" Ethan looked up briefly before checking another message lighting up his phone. "Everything settles down after this expansion," he answered automatically. "We just have to get through one more quarter." Jasmine nodded, though her eyes suggested she had heard the same promise before. "You have said that every quarter for almost 2 years." Ethan reached for her hand. "I am doing this for us." Jasmine squeezed his fingers gently. "I know you believe that." The conversation ended there, not because either of them became angry, but because neither knew how to continue without reopening the same discussion again. Over the following months, the silences between them slowly grew longer than the conversations. Business trips replaced weekends together. Missed dinners became ordinary. Special occasions quietly disappeared beneath meetings that always seemed impossible to postpone. Looking back now, Ethan realized there had never been one devastating argument capable of ending their relationship. There had only been hundreds of ordinary moments when love patiently waited while ambition unknowingly walked ahead alone. As dawn approached, Ethan opened his laptop and searched the guest list from the charity gala. His eyes stopped on one name that immediately answered the question he had been afraid to ask. Jasmine Carter, pediatric occupational therapist, Boston Children's Hospital, volunteer coordinator. Beneath her name appeared an emergency contact listed for event organizers. The contact did not belong to Jasmine. It belonged to a little girl named Ava Carter, born exactly 5 years and 4 months earlier. Jasmine Carter did not leave the charity gala immediately after the unexpected encounter. Instead, she spent the next hour helping volunteers organize donated supplies, thanking sponsors, and walking families toward the exits with the same quiet warmth she offered everyone she met. If anyone noticed that her hands lingered a little longer around the boxes she carried, or that her smile occasionally faded when she believed no one was watching, they were kind enough not to mention it. Ava skipped happily beside her, holding a stuffed teddy bear she had won during one of the children's activities. As they stepped into the cool Boston evening, the little girl reached for Jasmine's hand. "Mommy?" she asked softly. "Was that really my daddy?" Jasmine paused before unlocking the car. She knelt until they were eye level and gently brushed a loose curl away from Ava's forehead. "He is someone who was very important to Mommy a long time ago," she answered carefully. Ava tilted her head with innocent curiosity. "Then why did he look like he did not know me?" Jasmine smiled with quiet tenderness. Sometimes grown-ups do not understand important things until much later than they should. Ava accepted the answer with the uncomplicated trust only children possess. She climbed into her booster seat, humming to herself, as Jasmine drove home through streets glowing beneath rows of autumn lights. Later that night, after Ava had fallen asleep, Jasmine quietly opened a wooden memory box stored on the highest shelf of her bedroom closet. Inside rested photographs, birthday cards, concert tickets, and a neatly tied bundle of unopened copies of letters she had written years earlier. She gently touched the faded ribbon before closing the lid again. There was no reason to reopen old wounds, simply because fate had unexpectedly crossed two paths again. Her life had moved forward one ordinary day at a time, built through early mornings at the hospital, bedtime stories, school lunches, and countless moments teaching Ava that love was measured by consistency rather than promises. Her daughter had never grown up surrounded by bitterness. Whenever Ava asked about her father, Jasmine answered with kindness instead of resentment. "He does not know you yet," she would say. "That does not make him a bad person. It only means life became more complicated than either of us wanted." 6 years earlier, however, life had looked completely different. Jasmine still remembered the morning she walked into Ethan Calloway's office, carrying a small envelope containing photographs from a weekend trip they had taken together along the coast of Maine. She had hoped they could finally spend an entire evening without conference calls or investor meetings interrupting them. Ethan stood near the window discussing an overseas manufacturing agreement through his wireless headset. He smiled apologetically as she entered and quietly raised one finger, asking for another minute. That minute became 30. Jasmine eventually placed the envelope on his desk beside a cup of coffee before leaving without interrupting. Ethan noticed it only after she was gone. Inside, he found a handwritten note suggesting they take one weekend away from work before the holiday season became even busier. He smiled when he read it, genuinely intending to surprise her by accepting. Before he could call, his chief operating officer entered with news that a major international partnership required immediate travel to Seattle. Ethan packed within the hour, believing there would always be another weekend waiting for them. Jasmine watched his car disappear from the apartment window, still believing the same thing. Neither of them understood that the greatest turning points in life rarely announce themselves with dramatic arguments or impossible choices. More often, they arrive disguised as ordinary days, quietly asking for time that people assume they can always give tomorrow. 3 weeks after Ethan left for Seattle, Jasmine sat alone inside her doctor's office, listening as a gentle heartbeat echoed through the examination room for the very first time, realizing that everything about her future had just changed, including a conversation she never imagined would become the most important one she might never have the chance to have. The sound of the tiny heartbeat remained with Jasmine Carter long after she left the medical office that afternoon. She sat inside her parked car overlooking the Charles River, with both hands resting gently on the steering wheel, allowing herself several quiet minutes before starting the engine. The doctor had congratulated her warmly, handed her the first ultrasound photographs, and explained the months ahead with reassuring confidence. Jasmine smiled through grateful tears as she listened. But one question echoed more loudly than every other thought. How was she supposed to tell Ethan? That evening, she called his personal phone twice. Each call went directly to voicemail. She left a calm message asking him to return her call whenever he had time because she had important news to share. The following morning, she sent a text. And later that afternoon, she wrote an electronic mail explaining that the conversation was too important for messages and asking if they could meet as soon as he returned from Seattle. Days passed without a reply. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself consumed by a corporate crisis unfolding thousands of miles away. The international partnership had encountered unexpected legal complications, forcing him to remain on the West Coast far longer than planned. His executive assistant screened dozens of daily messages while coordinating meetings across multiple time zones. Personal calls were postponed. Unread electronic mail accumulated inside folders marked for later review. Ethan believed he would catch up as soon as the negotiations ended. Jasmine believed the same thing. After another week without hearing from him, she mailed a handwritten letter to his apartment, carefully placing the ultrasound photograph inside the envelope. She wrote only what mattered most. "Ethan, I know life is overwhelming right now, but there is something beautiful I need to tell you. Please call me when you receive this. We are going to be parents." She sealed the envelope with quiet hope, never imagining that it would never reach the hands for whom it had been written. 2 days earlier, Ethan had permanently relocated from his apartment into a new condominium closer to the headquarters of Calloway Robotics. His mail forwarding request had been delayed because of an administrative processing error, causing several weeks of personal correspondence to be returned before the transition was completed. Jasmine knew nothing about the move. Ethan knew nothing about the missing letter. Weeks slowly became months. Jasmine continued writing, believing perhaps her earlier messages had simply arrived during the busiest season of Ethan's career. Each letter carried another update: the baby's first ultrasound, the first tiny heartbeat, the first kick she felt while working at the hospital. Every envelope disappeared into the same broken chain of circumstances neither of them understood. Eventually, silence became the only answer she received. One snowy December evening, Jasmine visited Dr. Olivia Bennett after finishing a long shift at Boston Children's Hospital. Olivia listened quietly as Jasmine described every unanswered call and every returned hope. "Have you considered that something may have happened?" Olivia asked gently. Jasmine looked down at the untouched tea resting between her hands. "Every day," she admitted, "but I cannot force someone to answer a question they never choose to hear." Olivia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "What will you do now?" Jasmine glanced at the latest ultrasound photograph resting inside her purse before smiling softly. "I will love this little girl enough that she never mistakes someone else's silence for her own worth." Months later, as spring sunlight filled the hospital delivery room, Jasmine held her newborn daughter for the very first time. She whispered a promise that would quietly guide every decision she made from that day forward. "You will always know you were wanted," she said gently, as little Ava wrapped tiny fingers around her mother's hand. Across the city, Ethan accepted a National Innovation Award before hundreds of applauding executives, completely unaware that while he celebrated the biggest achievement of his career, the most important chapter of his life had already begun without him. 5 days after the charity gala, Ethan Calloway found himself standing in the records department of the condominium where he had lived 6 years earlier. The building manager, now preparing for retirement, searched through archived storage boxes after Ethan explained he was trying to trace correspondence that might never have reached him during the months he had moved into his new home. "Most returned mail was destroyed after the required holding period," the manager explained apologetically. "But there was one unusual situation during the transition. Several boxes from the forwarding office were accidentally stored in our basement before anyone realized they belonged to another shipment." Hope and uncertainty rose together inside Ethan as they descended into the climate-controlled archive. Dust-covered shelves filled with forgotten packages, old maintenance records, and unclaimed deliveries. After nearly half an hour, the manager pulled a weathered cardboard carton from the highest shelf. A faded label still displayed Ethan's former apartment number. "This is everything that never made it through the forwarding process," he said quietly. Ethan carefully opened the box. Inside rested utility statements, magazines, holiday cards, and beneath them, tied together with a pale blue ribbon, 4 unopened envelopes, addressed in handwriting he recognized immediately. Jasmine Carter. His hands trembled as he picked up the first letter. The postmark dated back almost 6 years. He broke the seal with extraordinary care, unfolding pages that had waited longer to be read than they were ever meant to. "Dear Ethan, I hope Seattle is treating you kindly. I know how much this project means to you, and I am proud of everything you are building. I only wish I could tell you this in person, because some news deserves a smile instead of ink. We are going to have a baby." Ethan stopped reading. The words blurred as his eyes filled with emotion he no longer tried to suppress. He reached for the second letter. It contained the first ultrasound photograph and a short note describing how the tiny heartbeat had sounded stronger than Jasmine expected. The third letter spoke about choosing paint colors for a nursery she had quietly begun preparing, hoping Ethan would come home before she needed to finish it alone. The final envelope contained a photograph of a newborn wrapped in a soft white blanket. On the back, Jasmine had written only one sentence: "Meet your daughter, Ava. She already has your smile whenever she sleeps." Ethan lowered the photograph into his lap and covered his face with both hands. For years he had believed Jasmine had simply disappeared from his life without explanation. He had convinced himself that her silence confirmed she no longer wanted him. The truth was almost unbearable in its simplicity. She had never stopped reaching for him. He had simply never received her voice. The building manager quietly stepped away, understanding that some moments deserved privacy more than conversation. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove to the small neighborhood playground listed on the Charity Foundation volunteer schedule, where Ava's elementary school hosted an after-school reading program every Wednesday. He parked across the street without leaving his car. Through the windshield, he watched Jasmine sitting beneath a large maple tree, while Ava proudly read from a brightly illustrated storybook. Each time the little girl stumbled over a difficult word, Jasmine smiled patiently, instead of correcting her immediately, allowing confidence to arrive before perfection. Ethan realized he was watching 6 years of ordinary moments he could never reclaim. Yet even through the quiet ache of regret, one thought slowly began replacing every other. If Jasmine had spent all those years protecting Ava's childhood without bitterness, then the least he could do now was approach their lives with the same patience and respect she had shown from the very beginning. The following Saturday morning, Ethan Calloway arrived at the neighborhood park nearly 30 minutes before the weekly children's reading program was scheduled to begin. He had not called ahead. He had not asked anyone to arrange the meeting. After reading every letter Jasmine had written, he understood that the years he had missed could never be recovered through urgency. If there was any place for him in Ava's life now, it would have to be earned with patience rather than expectation. He remained near a walking trail overlooking the playground until he noticed Jasmine and Ava approaching together. Ava wore a small backpack decorated with colorful stars while happily telling her mother about the library book she planned to borrow after the reading session. Jasmine noticed Ethan almost immediately. She slowed her steps but did not turn away. Instead, she gently rested a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "why do not you go say hello to Miss Harper? I think she is getting the story corner ready." Ava smiled, waved toward Ethan with innocent friendliness, and skipped ahead without realizing the quiet conversation about to begin behind her. Ethan waited until she was safely out of earshot before speaking. "Thank you for not asking me to leave." Jasmine folded her hands together calmly. "This park belongs to everyone." Ethan nodded, accepting the quiet reminder that he no longer held any special place in her life simply because they once loved each other. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The laughter of children carried across the playground, while parents arranged picnic blankets beneath the shade of tall oak trees. Finally, Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed the 4 letters tied together with the faded blue ribbon. Jasmine stared at them without moving. The color slowly disappeared from her face. "Where did you find those?" she whispered. "Inside a forgotten storage box at my old condominium," Ethan answered. "They never reached me." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly. Years of unanswered questions suddenly settled into a single heartbreaking explanation. "I thought you chose silence," she admitted quietly. Ethan looked down at the letters resting in his hands. "I thought you had stopped believing in us." Neither statement accused the other. They simply described two people whose lives had been changed by circumstances neither of them had understood. Ethan carefully handed the letters back to her. "I read every word," he said. "I know about the phone calls, the electronic mail, the letters, the ultrasound. I know I missed everything." Jasmine accepted the bundle without unfolding it. "I never wanted Ava to believe you walked away after knowing she existed," she said gently. "That is why I always told her you did not know her yet." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You protected me, even after believing I had abandoned you." Jasmine shook her head softly. "No, I protected her. Children deserve the freedom to love without carrying the weight of adult pain." Ethan lowered his eyes. Every sentence she spoke revealed another measure of grace he had never fully appreciated. "I am not here to ask for another chance with us," he said, after a long silence. "I have no right to expect that. I only came to ask whether one day, when you believe the time is right, I might have the opportunity to introduce myself properly to my daughter." Jasmine watched him carefully, searching not for polished words, but for the man standing behind them. Before she could answer, a cheerful voice echoed across the playground. "Mommy, look what I found." Ava came running toward them holding a picture book almost as large as her arms. She stopped beside Ethan with an easy smile that carried no fear, only curiosity. "Are you staying to hear the story too?" she asked. Ethan looked toward Jasmine. She met his eyes for a quiet moment before giving the smallest, almost invisible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was simply the first door opening after years of believing every door had already been closed forever. From that Saturday forward, Ethan Calloway never assumed another invitation would come automatically. Every opportunity to spend time with Ava began with a simple question directed to Jasmine, and every answer depended on what was best for their daughter, rather than what felt easiest for him. Sometimes Jasmine agreed. Sometimes she suggested another day because Ava already had plans. Ethan accepted every decision without complaint. He had spent years missing ordinary moments. He refused to waste the new ones by demanding more than he had earned. Their first afternoon together lasted less than an hour inside the neighborhood library. Ava proudly introduced Ethan to her favorite reading corner, where brightly colored beanbags surrounded shelves filled with adventure stories and picture books. She selected a book about constellations because, as she happily explained, "Mommy says every star has its own place, even if we cannot always see it." Ethan smiled as he read aloud, occasionally stumbling over dramatic character voices that made Ava laugh so hard she covered her mouth with both hands. The laughter surprised him. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without feeling nervous. Yet reading to one curious little girl felt like the most important responsibility he had ever accepted. Before leaving, Ava slipped a folded drawing into his hand. It showed 3 stick figures standing beneath a bright yellow sun. One figure wore a blue dress, another wore a green shirt, and the smallest held both of their hands. Above the drawing, written in careful kindergarten handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for reading with me." Ethan carefully folded the paper and placed it inside his wallet beside the photographs Jasmine had once mailed years earlier. During the weeks that followed, he never tried to impress Ava with expensive gifts or extravagant experiences. Instead, he learned the routines that already shaped her life. On Wednesday afternoons, he attended the community reading program. Saturday mornings became park visits where they fed ducks, built tiny sailboats from fallen leaves, and counted airplanes crossing the Boston sky. One rainy weekend, they spent an afternoon assembling a birdhouse from an inexpensive wooden kit purchased at a neighborhood hardware store. When Ethan accidentally attached one panel upside down, Ava laughed before announcing, "That makes it special because we built it together." Her words instantly carried him back 6 years to another rainy afternoon, when Jasmine had said almost the same thing while they made matching bracelets by hand. Some memories still hurt, but now they also reminded him of the person he wanted to become. Jasmine watched these quiet changes from a respectful distance. She noticed that Ethan always arrived early and never canceled plans because of work. When unexpected meetings appeared on his calendar, he rescheduled the meetings instead of disappointing Ava. One afternoon, Dr. Olivia Bennett joined Jasmine for coffee after finishing hospital rounds. "He seems different," Olivia observed, as they watched Ethan patiently helping Ava tie her shoelaces before the little girl raced toward a playground slide. Jasmine followed them with thoughtful eyes. "He is different," she admitted softly. "The question is whether different has become permanent." Olivia smiled gently. "Trust does not return because someone says the right words." Jasmine nodded. "It returns because the right actions become ordinary." As autumn slowly gave way to winter, Ethan received an invitation to speak at one of the largest technology conferences in Europe, an opportunity he once would have accepted without hesitation. The event conflicted with Ava's first school winter concert, where she had been practicing for weeks to sing with her classmates. His executive assistant expected the usual answer. Instead, Ethan quietly declined the international invitation. That evening, seated in the front row of the elementary school auditorium, he applauded louder than anyone when Ava spotted him in the audience and smiled with unmistakable joy before the music even began. Standing near the back of the auditorium beside other parents, Jasmine watched the exchange in silence. For the first time in many years, she realized she was no longer measuring Ethan by the promises he had once broken. She was measuring him by the promises he quietly kept without anyone asking. Winter slowly settled over Boston, covering neighborhood parks with a light blanket of snow that transformed familiar streets into quieter places, where every footprint seemed to tell a story. By then, nearly 6 months had passed since Ethan Calloway first met Ava, without realizing she was his daughter. Time had not erased the years he had missed, but it had begun filling the empty spaces with new memories, built patiently, one ordinary day after another. Every Thursday afternoon, Ethan picked Ava up from her after-school art club after receiving Jasmine's permission weeks in advance. Every Saturday morning they visited the public library before stopping at the same neighborhood bakery where Ava insisted the cinnamon rolls tasted better whenever they shared them together. Ethan noticed something remarkable about fatherhood. None of the moments that mattered most appeared extraordinary while they were happening. They were made of shoelaces tied before school, bedtime stories chosen carefully, spilled hot chocolate cleaned together, and long conversations about stars, birds, and why snowflakes never looked exactly alike. One Friday evening, a heavy snowstorm forced schools across the city to close early. Jasmine remained at Boston Children's Hospital caring for young patients whose families could not safely travel home. She called Ethan from the hospital just after noon. "Would you be able to keep Ava with you until my shift ends?" she asked. Ethan answered without hesitation. "As long as you need." It became the first time Ava spent an entire afternoon at Ethan's home. Instead of luxury surprising her at every turn, Ethan intentionally kept the day simple. Together they baked chocolate chip cookies, using a recipe Margaret Calloway had taught him years before. They watched birds gather outside large windows overlooking Boston Harbor. They built a blanket fort in the living room and read adventure stories while snow drifted quietly beyond the glass. At one point, Ava wandered into Ethan's study, searching for colored pencils. Her attention settled on a framed photograph resting quietly among bookshelves filled with engineering journals and business awards. The picture showed a much younger Ethan and Jasmine standing beside the Charles River, laughing while wearing matching rain jackets during a weekend hiking trip. Ava picked up the frame carefully. "Mommy looks happy here," she said softly. Ethan walked beside her and looked at the photograph for a long moment. "She was," he answered honestly. Ava looked up with innocent curiosity. "Were you happy too?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Very happy. I just did not understand how important those days were until much later." Ava gently returned the photograph to its place before slipping her small hand into his. "Mommy says people learn forever." Ethan felt emotion quietly rise inside him. "Your mommy is very wise." That evening, after Jasmine finally arrived to take Ava home, she noticed the photograph still resting on the study desk instead of facing the wall where Ethan had kept it hidden for years. "She found it," Ethan explained. Jasmine looked at the familiar image before smiling faintly. "I wondered when she eventually would." They stood together near the front door while Ava gathered her backpack. For several peaceful moments, neither of them felt pressured to fill the silence. It no longer carried unfinished anger. It simply reflected two people learning how to stand beside each other again without pretending the past had never happened. Before leaving, Jasmine quietly turned toward Ethan. "Thank you for today," she said. Ethan shook his head gently. "Thank you for trusting me with something that matters more than anything I have ever built." Jasmine studied him for a thoughtful moment before answering. "Trust is still growing," Ethan nodded. "I know." As Jasmine and Ava disappeared into the softly falling snow, Ethan watched from the front porch until their car turned the corner. For the first time in many years, he realized he was no longer hoping life would return to what it had once been. Instead, he found himself grateful for the slower, quieter future they were building together, one ordinary day at a time. Spring arrived quietly, carrying warmer mornings, blooming cherry trees, and the familiar promise that even the longest winters eventually give way to something new. Nearly 1 year had passed since a little girl had unknowingly changed 3 lives with a single word spoken in a crowded ballroom. During that year, Ethan Calloway never tried to erase the years he had missed with extravagant gestures or impossible promises. He attended every parent-teacher conference Jasmine invited him to, He learned which bedtime story Ava requested most often, how she always asked for extra blueberries with breakfast on Saturdays, and why she believed every rainbow deserved a wish, even if no one could ever reach the end of it. The routines became ordinary, and in becoming ordinary, they became priceless. Jasmine watched the transformation with the quiet patience that had always guided her decisions. She noticed that Ethan no longer measured his calendar by board meetings alone. School concerts, library afternoons, community volunteer events, and simple family dinners appeared beside corporate responsibilities with equal importance. He had not become a different man overnight. He had become a better man through hundreds of consistent choices that no newspaper would ever report. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Ava's elementary school hosted its annual Spring Family Festival on a grassy field overlooking the Charles River. Children painted flower pots, flew colorful kites, and laughed as parents gathered beneath white tents decorated with handmade banners. Ethan arrived carrying a picnic basket instead of a briefcase. Jasmine smiled when she noticed that he had remembered to pack Ava's favorite strawberry lemonade without anyone reminding him. They spent the afternoon helping Ava decorate a small wooden birdhouse, cheering as she won second place in the school scavenger hunt, and applauding during the student choir performance where her bright voice rose proudly above the others. As the festival drew to a close, Ava tugged gently on both of their hands. "Can we take one picture together?" she asked hopefully. Jasmine and Ethan exchanged a quiet glance before smiling at the same time. A nearby teacher offered to take the photograph. They stood close enough for Ava to wrap one arm around each of them, her joyful smile brighter than the afternoon sunshine. The camera captured something neither wealth nor success could ever purchase. It captured trust rebuilt through time. Later, while families slowly packed blankets and folding chairs, Ava ran toward the playground with classmates, leaving Jasmine and Ethan watching from a nearby bench beneath blooming dogwood trees. "I used to think life gave people second chances," Ethan said softly. "Now I think it gives people opportunities to become worthy of the first chance they already had." Jasmine looked toward Ava climbing confidently across the playground bridge before answering. "Sometimes the greatest gift is not getting the past back. It is finally understanding what the past was trying to teach us." Ethan nodded with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for never teaching Ava to hate me." Jasmine smiled gently. Hatred would only have stolen something from her too. A comfortable silence settled between them as children laughed beneath the spring sky. There was no dramatic declaration, no grand proposal, and no promise that tomorrow would be perfect. There was only the peaceful certainty that they had chosen honesty instead of pride, patience instead of resentment, and responsibility instead of regret. Before leaving, Ava came running back with a small wildflower she had carefully picked from the school's community garden. She handed it to Ethan with complete confidence. "This one is for you, Daddy," she said happily. Ethan accepted the tiny flower as though it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. He looked toward Jasmine, whose eyes reflected quiet warmth instead of lingering sorrow, and understood that family was never built by one extraordinary moment. It was built by countless ordinary days when people chose to show up for one another again and again, until love no longer depended on the past and hope no longer feared the future.